Everybody, this is going to be a great episode. I'm really excited to welcome Toine from Westerlay Orchids to the Flower Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
I was one of the things. If you go back in Instagram world, you'll probably see a picture of me and Twan when I visited his where it's not a warehouse, his greenhouses, where they grow all these amazing Phalaenopsis. And I mean, you guys have to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Phalaenopsis growers. I don't know, how do you rank that? How do you even know what goes
We've
on?
got a pretty good idea. We're the largest on the West Coast. I believe we're the third largest in the country. There's a
Okay.
couple of folks on the East Coast who are bigger by volume. They're both actually substantially bigger than us. Yeah, but we do almost 4 million orchids a year.
That's insane. That is so
Do we grow
amazing.
grow and ship 4 million orchids a year?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd love to know. We always like to start at the beginning. How did you get into growing orchids, or how and into the world of flowers?
Sure. I'm Dutch. You can tell by the name, right? I was born in the Netherlands. We emigrated here in the late 70s when I was 6 years old. My father had been in business in the Netherlands with his brothers. They grew chrysanthemums there. Prior to that, my grandfather grew tomatoes in greenhouses there. So my father emigrated here to this area in Southern California where there were already a few families, Dutch folks from around the same area as us, moved here, and he started growing roses. So my
Wow.
dad grew roses and did that really successfully for over 20 years. And I recall that I worked for him for a little while. I was out of college, and to be honest, at that age, it didn't really do it for me. It was just being in a greenhouse all day and not really talking to anybody. At the time, was being pretty young, was not what I was looking for, and I moved to Los Angeles, went to graduate school, had a couple of jobs there, more in the corporate world. In late Actually, it was probably 2000, 2001. I lost my job in the dot-com bust, the year
Sure.
2000 bust, and ended up saying, I'll work for my dad for a little while, kind of get my feet under me. And at the time, my dad said, it's great to have you back. It might be temporary, but here's the thing, like
Okay.
I'm getting to an age where I'm thinking I'm going to retire, but if I don't retire, we have to do something new because the long-term future for cut flowers is really tough. And so he'd been looking around and he had decided that he wanted to look at orchids as a business. And at the time, I really enjoyed it much. And I decided, I think I want to do this with you. So together we decided we'd really make a huge shift in what we were doing. So this is 2001 or so, 2002. And initially, we went after potted cymbidiums. We thought potted cymbidiums would be a good market for us. And we did that actually for quite a while. But after just a couple of years, I was looking around and saying, well, that's very much a seasonal product, and we need to find something that is more year round. And already in the Netherlands and in a couple spots in the country, you saw people starting to grow Phalaenopsis at mass numbers, and the technology had changed dramatically, and the know-how in that crop had really advanced pretty dramatically over a few years. So our timing was pretty good. We made a lot of dumb mistakes in the beginning, but we're able to survive those, and our timing was really good. And that's really how we ended up as orchid growers, and which we've been now for 20 years. And we did learn something along the way. We like to think we know what we're doing, to an extent anyway, although we're always learning.
Right. Well, I mean, I think as growers, you never stop learning for sure. It's interesting you said that because I had forgotten, but a long time ago, we used to ship cymbidium plants from you guys into
Okay,
Atlanta,
yeah.
and because you guys had this great size that wasn't these like gallon size. It's almost, I don't know what they were, but maybe they were like a 8-inch pot or something like more narrow
We had
and
two sizes. We had like a true gallon. Actually, we would call them gallons, which was a
right.
standard U.S. size, and then we had a slightly smaller, like a 3/4, was a European pot that we found that folks were growing them in the Netherlands with, and that I might have been that. It was we
Yeah.
called one a 6 inch and the other we called a 7 inch, if I can recall correctly. But yeah, that's what we produced them in.
Yeah, that was just, I mean, that was really great. And I remember that so vividly. And now, though, I mean, at what point, I mean, I know what you just said about, the seasonality of Cymbidiums and switching to fails. What was that transition like? Because, I mean, that has to be a huge capital investment to go
Yes.
from one orchid to another. I mean, like you think, oh, we'll just swap orchids. Well, they don't have the same cycles, the same,
Well, we grew them side by side for good, I'd say at least 10 years. I mean, we sold our last Cymbidiums 5 years ago, maybe.
wow.
It's been a while. We grew them for a long time. We grew them, I said, maybe probably closer to 15 years that we grew Cymbidiums. And the issue with Cymbidiums, they're seasonal. They take a lot of space. If you're talking about a square foot of greenhouse, you're not even producing a single Cymbidium in that a year. Let's say 10 square feet of greenhouse, you're producing 7 or 8 Cymbidiums if you're being really effective. With Phalaenopsis, that's over 50 in the same space
Oh,
or higher.
wow.
And that's growing from start to finish like we do. If you're just, a lot of folks are only finishing plants that they're importing, and then obviously the turnover is even higher. But you're pretty, and actually that was one of the things that was so nerve-wracking, but certainly made you think when we were moving into Phalaenopsis. It's like, in a single acre of greenhouse, how much could you potentially produce in a year? I'm like, oh my gosh, the numbers that you're starting to think about, and can you actually sell that kind of stuff? Are you talking about, all of a sudden you're selling 250,000 orchids just out of a single acre greenhouse? And we're a pretty sizable business now. We were a much smaller business then. So wrapping your head around those kinds of numbers was initially pretty scary.
Mm. I can't even imagine. And so walk us through kind of what does that look like as far as growing fails, because
Sure.
it's not like a sunflower you can put a seed and cut it in 65 days. So or
Well, I don't
55
know how to grow
depending.
sunflowers, and I certainly wouldn't ever. I always, you realize what everybody does is much more complicated than it looks like from the outside. So all you sunflower grower listeners out there, you have my respect. I'm sure it's much more complicated than we imagine. Phalaenopsis orchids are almost, at this point, almost all meristem plants. That is, they're clones. There's When we started all those years ago, 20 plus years ago, there were quite a few folks who are still growing in seedlings. That has almost entirely gone away. It's completely gone commercially, as far as I know. But there are companies mostly in Western Europe and in Taiwan who are doing a lot of breeding. Those folks also have laboratories, so their labs creating these clones. Plants are then sent either to folks who are doing the rooting for companies growing plugs, or to the companies directly. So we grow our plants directly out of flasks ourselves. A lot of
Oh,
folks
wow.
will buy plugs from a third party. That plug process generally takes 5 or 6 months to grow a good, healthy size plug. So we're ordering right now. We've ordered plants through the end of 2024. And once
Really?
we get those,
Oh my
yeah, so give you
goodness.
an idea of the timeline. At the end of 22, we place all our orders for 24. So the last plants in 24 showing up December 24 will take 6 months to grow. So we're potting them of June of 26, of 25. They'll be flowering around May of 26. So we have plants ordered already through Mother's Day of 26. That's how long the cycle is for us. We're ordering them. The lab has to develop them. They have to grow them. Then we have to grow them in their plug phase. Then we're growing them in their for 12 centimeter or 5 inch or standard size. We're growing them about 30 weeks in the grow phase. And then it's about 18 weeks once we send them to flower. So there you go. That's about 6 months in plug, about 11 months in growing. Yeah,
Wow.
it's a process.
Yeah,
And
and it takes up so much space, I would imagine. But I guess when they start off small, they don't they you can get a whole lot more on a bench than you can as they eventually end up as a 6 inch or whatever size you
Five
grow.
inch is really the standard size that you see in the United States. You don't really see much 6 inches, and that's a really big difference. And when we say 5 inch, we're rounding up into into a standard size because it's really 12 centimeter, which is a little bit smaller. Um, but yeah, we're putting in a square meter. Sorry, European thinking. Square meter.
Sure.
We're looking at around that's 11 square feet, right? So we're putting in at the first phase 80 plants in a meter. Then they get spaced about 60, and then their finals they're around 48, 50. So we're spacing them out over time. Um, but that's a lot. That's pretty dense. Like I said, in an acre of greenhouse, you're producing up 200,000 plants or more. So that's it's a it, it it's still an appreciable amount of a product coming out of that space. But
Yeah.
it's the timeline, and that for us in our business is certainly a challenge in managing that, and it makes it an expensive business to get into because you've got to build up all that inventory before you're selling anything.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and do you find that planning so far ahead? I mean, you can't. I mean, you're committed at that point. It's not like you can, zig or zag with demand or color preferences or anything like that. I
No,
mean,
unfortunately
it doesn't
not.
really
We have to
vary.
do our best guess. We can't pick seasonal colors. We
Right.
we do tweak our program so that we have more oranges and yellows and things like that in the fall, more white, more purple in the winter at the margins. But you have to just be pretty conservative about your mix. You can't be, and varieties also. Um, you can't just jump into a new variety. It takes time to build it up and to understand how it grows. Um, there's a lot, and I think that was as I was doing preparation for this, um, thinking about how we develop and change the variety selection. But that is also a long process. We'll test something in a very small batch, and then a little bit more, and then over time. So we might see a new variety now at one of our breeders. We get it a year later in a small test. 2 years later, we have a little bit a good size test, and then 3 years from now, it's okay. Now we're really producing this thing. So
Good
for us to
grief.
be able to react to new things that we see in the market, and half the time we test something, we're like, we don't actually like this. This is not going to work for us. So no good.
That's interesting. And so, what things do you look for when you're testing? I mean, because obviously, flower bud count, things like that are important.
Sure.
But what else?
And and anyone who's been paying attention to Phalaenopsis with the level of detail that I certainly have been over the last 20 years, it's pretty remarkable how much the breeding has changed and the new things that are out there. Um, Specifically colors. You used to have a couple of yellows, and the yellows weren't that strong. Now you've got amazing yellows, you've got reds, you've got oranges. I've seen browns. You've got all kinds of striped and spotted. Flower size gets bigger. Propensity for double spikes gets higher. Uh, in the background of that, one of the things that we look for very with a lot of really critically is disease resistance, growth speed, um, also stability. Like these things are clones, but not all of them are as consistent as others. So
Really?
consistency and that's more less with the breeding and more to do with the lab work. But a new variety that's very hot can all of a sudden be overproduced because growers all over the world all of a sudden want this thing. They overproduce it, and it tends to be unstable. Um, so there's the background suite of stuff that we're looking for in productivity, plant health, things like that, and then there's the stuff that the consumer sees: color, flower size. But yeah, it's amazing some of the stuff that's coming out now, and it's and there's still a lot being invested by breeders into this, and we work very consistently with a handful of breeders. So we're kind of always getting their latest stuff to test and trying to stay in front of the market with that. But because it's such a long time, and because you can't be sure, we still do have to be conservative in the selections we make.
Right. Right. No, it makes perfect sense. I was wondering when I was there, there were some things I saw that I always questioned. Fails you always see staked or different
Hmm.
things. And when I was in Japan, I don't know, 5 years ago, or maybe longer, I noticed like they had a lot of these like bending of stems to create
Hmm.
like these waterfall. And I noticed you guys did that too. And I'm just curious, or I
Yeah.
think you do. And
Hmm.
I'm curious, what dictates these sort of aesthetical, I mean, yeah, I don't know how to call it, but these how the popularity of manipulating the stems to these cool shapes.
Well, what you're talking about, the waterfall or the cascade, as we call them, very much something that has come out of Asia. Yeah, we do that. There's certain varieties that really lend themselves to that. If you get a, a white orchid with very large flowers, long stem, and you make that beautiful, elegant look. Um, that's just something that, yeah, it resonates with people. Somebody else thought that up, and we certainly piggybacked on that. You'll see, seasonally speaking, we'll have varieties where we put a wire that's in the shape of a heart, and we'll make a heart,
Oh,
two
cool.
flower spikes following, tracking with a heart. That's something that we do at Valentine's Day. Something that we developed here in house and actually have a patent pending on is what we call our bramble, where we take. If do you recall seeing these when you were here?
I think so. Go ahead, because I,
Yeah. So
I
we
I was
take
gonna
a
ask
standard
you about
orchid.
them. I couldn't remember what to call them.
Yeah, so we take a standard orchid, and a few weeks prior to where you might otherwise stake it, the spike is still developing. It's pliable. We put a frame on it, and the spike will grow inside of its frame and twist around. And as then the flower comes out to spike, we take the frame off. The frame is then only really on the spike and not on the flowers itself. We take the frame off, and now you've got a plant. Unfortunately, I don't want to have one at my desk to show you, but then you have got a plant that's got the flowers that are low and sort of spreading, brambling, as we call it, and that gives you a really great product that you can put on a table. If you and I could sit across from each other with this orchid as a centerpiece and still have a nice conversation. Orchids gives you another place to put the orchid. So that's another thing that we do. And we have something new that we're throwing out called a wave, which is sort of the cascade, sort of two cascades tracking next to each other, one slightly below the other. So that's something that we're introducing this season. We're getting really good traction with that. So always looking for something new. And again, it's an aesthetic thing, and does it resonate with people or not? And we hope it does. We like it.
Well, the bramble, I remember seeing that, and I thought that was one of the. It's so subtle, but it's one of those things that it almost makes the orchid like it makes you wonder: is this how it naturally grows? Of course, we know it doesn't, but it was. I don't know. It was just orchids sometimes are so stiff, and because of the staking to protect the
Hmm.
stem, or architecturally, people have wanted that, so that's what you do, and for shipping purposes. But when you see that bramble and you see the way it just kind of has that kind of curl and meanders,
Hmm.
I'm just it's just I don't know. To me, I feel like it's something really special, and I think, and especially with some of the cool colors you do it with.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah. One of the things I got so many questions. One of the things I think about, and I don't know, it just came to me. Like, why have you chosen to not do cut stems?
Mm. Uh, this is just a really commercial, business-like answer. I think uh, we've got a set of customers. Our business, we are producing for the supermarkets for 80 to 90%. So um, a lot of the major supermarkets here on the West Coast are our key customers. And, so you've got a sales channel that's established, and cut flowers, that's a different sales channel. I
Sure.
think cut orchids is a pretty small market. It's a pretty niche market to begin with. Um, and you really do want to grow the plant a slightly different way. Sometimes we have a little oversupply, a little extra, and we might sell some to local markets. It's a nice product. But I've also visited orchid growers that specifically grow for cut flowers. and it's a whole different process, and they're doing it and they're approaching it a different way, and how they pack that stuff is very specialized. So
Right.
I don't think, even though it's the same plant, ultimately, it the handling is very different, and the sales channel is very different.
Right, right. And that makes perfect sense. You know, and I've got to ask this question. I know, I mean, I have a fail here that is actually bloomed now 3 times, and I don't know what I do or don't do, but I know that's one of the questions I used to get when we sold them all the time, plants that is, and it's like,
Yeah.
how do I get my orchid to rebloom? And I can't think of anybody better to ask this question of. Of course, maybe you don't want them to rebloom because then they
No,
would buy
no, no,
another
no. Whoa,
orchid.
whoa. Let's be super clear about that. I think once you get somebody who got their orchids to rebloom, they're hooked for life. So
Yeah,
I'm
true.
definitely and this is something that people come people want to talk about their orchids with me, strangers. They're like, oh, if I'm sitting on a plane, I tell somebody what I do. Oh, and then they you know, our company slogan is every orchid has a story, because people want to talk. People have relationships with their orchids, and they want to talk about their orchids, and we
I
think that's
love that.
awesome, and we want to definitely foster that. But to answer your question, really around how do you get your orchid to rebloom, I think think about the miracle of this thing. This is a plant that you probably bought at a supermarket for under $20, and it flowered for a couple months and looked nice, and now you have the opportunity to rebloom that. That's great. Like, what other product can you do this with?
Sure.
Having said that, it it doesn't happen on its own. And there's sort of 3 tips that I would give to keep it real simple. 3 tips, and overarching all that is to remember it's a plant, and the plant needs to be healthy, right? It doesn't, but there's no special magic to it. So the first thing is you got to let it dry out. You can't overwater it.
Hmm.
Right. So a plant wants an orchid plant needs to be watered regularly, but you got to wait till the roots dry out. Look and see, are the roots gray? The roots are gray and they've got little green tips at the end. That's when it's healthiest and happiest. If you're if the substrate's wet, if the roots are still all green, you don't need to water it yet. Let it dry out. That's number one. Number two is you got to keep it in a bright place. You might say, oh, I love my orchid in my bathroom, or I love it next to my bed. And that may look beautiful there, but it's still a plant and it needs light to thrive. So, really, like, we always say, like just a window where you're getting some afternoon light, or just some more afternoon or morning light, or some gentle light. You don't want it in a direct beam of light, but if it's getting a decent amount of bright light, indoor light, that's perfect. And then the third thing is you got to be patient. I think there's this expectation sometimes, well, it stopped flowering. When does it flower next? Well, in nature, if you're doing pretty well, I think the plant might flower twice a year. So don't overestimate. So I'm thinking anywhere from 2 to 6 months from the time it last flowered. And we do it all on our website, and sure, there's all over YouTube. There are great tips on how to get your orchids to reflower. You want to cut off the old flowered spikes above what we call a node, which are the little knuckles. Um, so maybe 2 nodes up. But again, just the basics are water on time when it's needed, when the roots are starting to turn gray. Get it enough bright light, but not direct, and be patient.
Sure.
Those are the three most important things. You can fertilize it, you can work with the temperature. It's helpful, but you don't need to do that.
Interesting. Well, so when you see like the new growth come out and you'll see a spike get generated up underneath that comes out from beneath the leaf,
Right?
and and I think so. How I like most of the time, like the plant that I have that's rebloomed, I've done exactly what you described, where I cut it down to that second node or knuckle or
Mhm.
whatever, and that's usually where it reblooms, is right there. So you don't necessarily have to have new growth in order to get things to rebloom,
Mhm.
but typically though, that new growth is what generates the new bloom stalks from scratch, right?
Sure, sure. So if we like to send the plants to flower when they've got 4 or 5 mature leaves. So effectively, you need 4 mature leaves to get 2 flower spikes. That's how we kind
Okay.
of that's the sort of rough math on these plants. So when you get it at your house and it stopped flowering, if you continue if it grows, once it gets out of its flowering stage, it'll go vegetative and wants to grow again. If it makes another new leaf, boom, now it's created enough energy, it's got reserves, and it's able to make a new flower spike.
Hmm, that makes
But
perfect
like you
sense.
said, if you're cutting the old spike above that, it can sometimes, often, just push out new flowers from there. It's kind of a little cheat code, get you
Yeah.
there faster.
Yeah, for sure. And you said, I know fertilizers can be tricky. Do you have any recommendations? I know I always hear you can over fertilize orchids.
Yeah, no, they say
Easier.
that I think the mantra that I heard somewhere that works is weekly, weekly. You water weekly and you give a very weak dose of fertilizer. I've got a couple of plants in my house that I rebloom them too. I love doing that, and I don't fertilize them at all, and
Okay.
they do fine.
Yeah, I've
You know,
never
they
fertilized mine.
I'm not sure if I can get a third or fourth flowering on them, but yeah, just a tiny little bit of fertilizer is fine.
Sure. I know that in growing any crop, anything, there's always ups and downs. And I'm just curious, being that, you guys started as rose growers, went to cymbidiums, now are doing Phals. I'm sure you've had some major challenges you've had to overcome
Oh,
at
sure.
some point. And I know a lot of times our listeners, it's just helpful to hear how people dealt with these challenges. And I'm curious, if there's anything that stands out to you in looking back. There's probably a lot of things, but I'm just kind of curious if you'd mind sharing some of those stories.
Oh boy. Um, yeah, we've dealt with. I remember one point in time when we first started growing at scale our own young plants from flask. Um, we were getting all kinds of like losses early in, and we were kind of trying to put our fingers on it. And turned out we were kind of hit with a double whammy. We were both getting a lot of sciarid or fungus gnat, which as plants come out of flask, they're extremely delicate, very soft, and so fungus gnats just sort of feasting on the green tissue, and at the same time, um, we had a pretty. I don't want to say it'll never come back, but we've eradicated it to the point we never see them anymore. But we had a real infestation of caterpillars as well, just going and eating plants and just it's shocking the amount of damage a single caterpillar can do.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but what we found was, I think the house where we were growing the range that we were growing this stuff was next to a large hedge of bougainvillea, and
Yes.
that bougainvillea was absolutely covered in caterpillar, and the same caterpillar was getting inside the greenhouse. And but I remember just like throwing our hands like up, like, what do we do with this? We just kind of unused to these sorts of issues in the crops we had come from. And I remember getting a tip, and it was as simple as a biological agent, really effectively a bacteria that you're spraying on the plants that really took care of all the caterpillars. And then the sciarid is also what we apply a nematode treatment for that. And so really biologically, we were able to uh, really address what was a pretty serious problem at the time. Like we were like, how are we're not going to be able to grow these things ourselves, which we felt like was a key differentiator for us to be able to do that. We're like, we're not going to be able to do this ourselves unless we can solve this problem. And that was one of those times when it turned out to be a fairly easy solve. Certain other things are more persistent. In Phalaenopsis, the big challenge is and continues, I think, will always be, you're dealing with a warm, humid, wet environment often. Air movement can be an issue, and now
Right.
you're talking about fusarium and other fungal problems and bacterial rots that get into that. So hygiene is extremely important in what we do. Water treatment, making sure your water is clean, scouting for dead plants. It is a crop, compared to the cut flower world that we came out of, where frankly, is, there's a lot of to keep the thrip to keep the spider mite at bay. You're also talking about 25 years ago, but you know, the chemical solutions were the ones that you went to first, and it's nice to be in a crop where you don't have to do that.
Mm, I agree.
So
Yeah, I can't imagine. And because I'm trying to remember, how is your irrigation overhead or is it table?
yes, so
Okay,
within Phalaenopsis, it's a epiphytic plant that's growing
sure. In
on
trees.
trees,
Yeah.
sometimes in rocks, but usually on other on trees in rainforest, and capturing its water and its nutrition. Rain hits a tree, washes down whatever sort of organic materials are washed along with it, become the fertilizer. So this is how we're watering these things too. You can't put drip feeding a Phalaenopsis does not. So we're overheading. We do have an irrigation recapture system, so we're able to recycle all that water. At least at one of our locations, we're working on the other location with that. But yeah, that's how we irrigate. It's overhead.
Sure. Well, I know one of the things that I've read about in preparing for this and wanted to understand more about it is, especially in California, I know this has got to be a huge issue, but is the idea of sustainability. And you hear a lot of people talk about sustainability,
Mhm.
and it's different things for different people, which I
Sure.
get, because you try to do what you can do. I'm kind of curious how you guys, I mean, I feel like you guys really have tried to approach this in a big way, a really big way. And I'd love to hear some of the details and more information about it.
Um, sure. I think yes. I think I think it's a dangerous thing to start talking about sustainability without defining it. And I
Sure.
think for us, it really comes down to most importantly carbon footprint. Right? You have to be able to assess what that is and then work on reducing it. I mean, is the existential threat of our time is climate change, and the way you address that is by reducing um, dramatically, hopefully, carbon output. There are other things that matter too. Obviously, out here in the West, despite the lovely wet winter we've just had, is
Really.
working with reducing water usage. Reducing of virgin plastics is obviously also another important thing, but I think carbon is the most important. We've been measuring our carbon footprint for the last few years. I think this is our third year, or I think we're measuring our fourth year. We've measured 3 years. Um, we have been taking, so every year we're trying to find a new project to help us reduce the carbon footprint. The biggest thing we did was last year we put in a major solar installation. We also we also made a major investment, almost $500,000 in the water recycling system, which also ends up reducing natural gas usage in the greenhouse, because a lot of the natural gas was to reduce the humidity to dry out. So with the irrigation um, recapture, you're removing a lot of the water that way already. Um, some other projects right now that we're looking at is we've made we're waiting for the materials. We've ordered them. Dehumidifiers. So instead of um, a lot of the sort of the traditional way in Holland, they talk about the new growing, or het nieuwe telen. Sorry for any Dutch listeners you have out there, where they talk about um, the traditional way of growing in a greenhouse. When controlling humidity is to turn on the heat and open the windows and dry out your air that way. But now, of course, you're throwing out a lot of heat. So what we're trying to do with dehumidifiers and go to this new growing technique is you're able to keep your greenhouse closed and you're running dehumidifiers instead to reduce humidity. So we've got a pilot program planned for the second half of this year with that we are seeing, being told that we could look at a reduction of natural gas usage, which is the number one driver of our carbon footprint, natural gas to heat and dry the greenhouses. But we're looking at potentially reducing that by 25% if this works and we can implement it. Another technology that I think I'm really excited about that's a little bit further away is heat pumps. So
Mm.
heat pumps for folks in California, this is something, and I know in other parts of the country, heat pumps are something that's being pushed on a state level here in the to it's effectively instead of having a boiler or something like that that heats water or having a radiator in your house, you're through an electrical device with a compressor, you're able to heat and cool with the same device. So when it's hot outside, you're using it as you're able to use it as an air conditioning, and when it's cold outside, you're able to use it as a heater. Um, this is a, this technology is basically how you how your refrigerator cools things off. If you go to the back of your refrigerator and it's hot, that's the
Right.
waste heat. This concept for us, because Phalaenopsis also need an area certainly that you cool off, so that you have a system where you're both cooling and heating at the same time. And at night you're running when you're heating, the waste cold you capture and reuse during the day, and then vice versa during the day. These systems are running, and the waste heat is captured in water tanks and used at night. So a little bit complicated, but heat pump technology. We've modeled that out. That would reduce our natural gas usage by over 50%. You know, this is
Wow.
expensive. It's a long payback period, but I think really technology is going to, with some technology, I think can really solve or certainly make great strides towards solving our problem.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think too, the more companies and growers like you that start to embrace this technology, improve its viability, I think it's very, my hope would be that more people will see the value in it and the investment in
Well, you know,
return.
there's a business case to be made for this stuff too, right? We installed solar panels. I mean, the kilowatt cost of solar power is way less than traditional carbon-based solar. Now, it's got its challenges, you know. It's today was a really gray day, and tonight we'll be generating nothing. So it's got its challenges for sure. But having said that, like over time, and as technology improves and as storage capacity improves, you know, where things are going to get electrified, and you know, we want to be ahead of that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, at what point? I mean, with all of this technology, how long will it take for you to offset your carbon footprint, or do you even know yet?
To get down to zero, I think that's really challenging. You know, you also have to factor
Right,
in, hey, we're measuring also the product that is shipped to us. So there's stuff that's out of our hands. You know,
right.
do electrical trucks get when do electrical trucks hit the road? That sort of thing. I think it's hard for us to forecast that. You know, we've kind of put it out there as a big goal to eliminate our carbon footprint, but I think that's more. We haven't put a date on anything like that. Um, you know, we have also played around, I think is the right way to put it, with carbon offsets just to learn about it. You know, effectively, we are taking a sum of money and investing it through a third party that you that is vetted and has all kinds of certifications where they are investing that in renewable energy sources or reforestation projects. We invested in wind farms in India, the idea being that's going to displace coal burning in India, for example. So, and that you get a carbon offset credit for that. But you know, if you do, you know, if you can do some high school math, you realize that you can't just carbon offset your way out of this problem. So
Yeah.
you have to figure out how
Well,
to reduce your own carbon footprint.
exactly, and I think that's one of those things everyone needs to do. But I'm still excited to hear the effort that you're putting into it because, especially being a company that you plan on being around a little while. It's
I hope
not.
so.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're second generation. I don't know if there's talks of third generation, but I.
Well, we're a ways away from that. I have twin sons who turn 9 in a couple of days, and my daughter's 10. She seems to be the most interested of the three, which I
Well, you
think
got
she's
some
just trying
time.
to figure out. Yeah, no, she wants to make some extra money so she can, I don't know, all the different, you know,
That's
wants to buy
funny.
makeup for herself and stuff like that. So
Oh, fun.
new clothes.
Well, yes, wait till they all become
She's motivated,
teenagers.
at
Yeah,
least.
that's the key there. That's a huge thing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious. I know you've already talked a little bit about new varieties and what's
Mhm.
involved in that and the timetables and all those things. Curious if there's anything specifically on the horizon that maybe we should be looking for or things that might be uh, I don't know, out there.
Gosh, it's hard to say. I think it's just within the the true answer, which is probably the boring answer, is that within Phalaenopsis, at this point, you're looking at a lot of incremental change. There's rarely something that comes out, a new variety that I see that I'm like, oh wow, this is going to change things. It's a lot of incremental change. The breeders, they're all kind of looking at each other and all working on the same stuff. Um, I do every once in a while. You see a color that's amazing, or you see orchids that are growing much faster. Like growth speed is something that you're seeing tends to be in the less interesting colors or varieties. Those tend to be
Always.
easier to work with because we've seen them all already. But you're seeing plants growing a lot faster. So those will either you growing. I can grow the same plant faster for the same amount of money, or I can grow it the same amount of time I've always done, but make a bigger plant with more flowers, which is probably the direction we would go with that.
Right.
Um, so it's incremental. We ourselves as a company are the last couple of years have a small range, about an acre, where we're growing bromeliads,
Oh.
which is I think a very exciting product group that we've seen some really interesting breeding going on there. And these are very architectural, beautiful. They're cool plants, is the way we said. These things are cool. They're different. All these different shapes and colors and textures. So that's something that we're getting into. We think that might have, uh, as we look at our market, do we say like, well, if you want to be a bigger company, you want to supply more. We do have ambition, um, but at some point, just growing more orchids, you become your own competition. And we just said, this seems like a really cool product group, and we feel like there's an opportunity for us to maybe do something with it. So, like I said, for a couple of years, we've been growing an acre of the stuff, which we're able to produce somewhere north of 100,000 plants in there. Um, but ultimately, I think that'll our thought is that if we can figure this out and we're right about the market potential of this, then maybe it gives us an opportunity to look for more space and to grow more of that stuff, to grow a 500,000 or more, something along those lines. So that's still something that we're we like what we're doing, but we feel like there's a lot of learning to do still.
Right. And one of the things that I think I've seen a lot more of is the miniatures, like the miniature
Oh,
fails and
sure.
things. And I mean, I'm kind of curious if that's as profitable as the bigger ones when you consider you get, oh, there's a cute one. Yeah,
Yeah.
when you consider like they don't take up as much space, but they also don't get the same dollar value, I don't
Well,
think.
it's interesting. Like the plant that you pay for the lab costs the same amount of money. The
Right.
labor to pot it up is probably roughly the same. It takes less overhead, and the ceramic that you sell it in, which don't underestimate that portion of our business for us, that's a lot less. Um, I think at some point it also sort of this is a I love this is a beautiful plant. This is a variety that we're testing. I was like, wow, what a great color. But ultimately, something like this kind of gets lost against the bigger product. We grow a little less than 1 million of plants like this. This is actually the one product where we're actually bringing it in from Taiwan and finishing them off. Although next year we're going to start growing a large portion of them ourselves. This is a trial from our own in-house growing, um, and so that's something that we're excited about. But yeah, I think there's a it this the skews. It used to be there was the 12 centimeter or 5 inch, and now then there was some 9 centimeter or 3 inch, which we also do quite a bit of. And then this is something in the last few years that's really taken off, and I think there's a place in the market for it. I don't think it will displace bigger plants,
Right.
but there's definitely a place for them. And we want to grow them robust enough with enough flowers and enough vitality that it isn't just a cute little thing, but it's a real plant that people can experience and enjoy.
Well, it's a different niche altogether. I mean, you've got, people who don't have big spaces, or they just want something for their desk, or it's just a little gift,
Oh,
or
sure. I
uh,
mean, but I've got it right next to me here on my desk, and it's adorable. It's not something that I can have on a dining table or
right,
an entryway. It gets
right.
lost.
Yeah, absolutely, 1,000%. I think that's really interesting, and I love that. I I always like to sort of wrap up our episodes by asking that advice question. And being the one thing I always love about talking to someone like yourself is you definitely have a business dynamic to what you do. Even though you still get excited about it, it's still, it's very much, I mean, you're growing 4 million fails.
Yeah.
It's in the nuance. And I'm just kind of curious, if you have a piece of advice that's meant something to you or you'd like to share with our listeners.
um, I've gotten some really good advice over the years, and so I guess if I have to pass something on, uh, I think it serves you well to sort of be action oriented, to sort of have a bias towards taking action, as opposed to kind of waiting things out. Um, I had a friend once say to me when I was having a tough time in my life that he said, make decisions or decisions get made for you. You know,
Hmm.
so that's something that's a sort of a personal motto I've taken on. It meant a lot to me at the time. That it just it has not so much even in business. It has to do with your personal life, your business life, your spiritual life. Take charge of your own situation. I don't know. It's works. It works for me. I hope.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate you sharing that. I don't think anyone's ever shared that before, so I think I really feel like that's true, though. I mean, how many times do we get into that analysis paralysis thing, and then you're right, decisions get made for us. So,
Yeah.
I think that's really true. Well, I didn't say this at the beginning of the episode, and I probably would have said it in the intro, but I wanted to just, for people in Southern California that maybe don't know about you, where are you located? And I know that you have outlets pretty much all up and down the West
Oh
Coast, like
yeah.
you've already said.
Yeah. No. Let me plug. So yeah, we're in Carpinteria, just south of Santa Barbara. We do have a showroom on site, and we have a really incredible staff, and they've done. We just did a real, sort of refresh on the shop, and it looks amazing. And the staff is wonderful. They're very helpful. We also have a website. This is something that we don't do a lot of, but I think we do it well. It's westerlay.com, and we do ship orchids through our website. But what we're really focused on, and maybe this matters to your audience, we're not so much focused on the single shipper to the end consumer. We do that if someone really wants one. But we're really focused on is a box of orchids. In fact, that was the original name of the website, which I'm not sure if we should have changed it, but boxoforchids.com was what it was. But it's westerlay.com, and you can buy essentially the same box that we might be shipping to a supermarket, except you can ask for the color mix that you want, and we can ship it anywhere within the adjacent states in California. Well, Washington isn't adjacent, but Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, we ship, and California we ship there, and it's it's reasonably priced, and so we have quite a few customers who are retail focused and smaller garden centers and specialty folks who take advantage of that. So hope you check it out.
Yeah, that's great. And it's definitely worth it. And I know we're going to share photographs and all kinds of things on our website when we release this episode. So I hope you guys check it out. Check them out if you're in California. And, I know Twan feels this way, but I'm like, I hope the Phalaenopsis craze just keeps on keeping on. Because I think it just gets people excited and hooked about, plants in general.
Yeah, I do also say, like, I think we're past any sort of craze for Phalaenopsis or for orchids. I think people recognize just the intrinsic value. It's a beautiful plant
Absolutely.
that you're buying generally in a supermarket for under $20, and if you get a good if you take decent care of it, it's not the hardest thing in the world. It lasts for months, and with a little bit of skill and a little bit of patience, you can get it to rebloom. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's an incredible value proposition, I think, and
Yeah.
it's rewarding. So
That's
we like
awesome.
I love what I do.
I love that too. Well, Twan, thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.